Silence reigned in the huge concert hall. People waited with bated breath for the pianist to start playing. But he, a tall man with dark, unruly hair and sad eyes, was in no hurry. The musician could not get into the mood to play. His thoughts wandered elsewhere. Finally, the man lightly tapped the keys of the instrument with his thin fingers. A melody flowed. It should have been soft and dreamy, but the pianist turned it into a hazy ecstasy. He simply could not play it any other way, although he understood that the listeners, tired after a hard day, hoped to relax. Several hours passed. A voice from the loudspeaker announced the end of the concert. The audience began to leave their seats before, of course, rewarding the pianist with applause. Only one dark-haired girl and her blonde friend somehow did not leave the hall. The dark-haired girl complained that she could not stand up. Her friend sighed. "Hey, has the anemia made itself felt again?" The blonde asked the dark-haired one why she went to the concert on an empty stomach. She should have at least eaten a chocolate bar. The blonde handed her friend a bottle of water. "Drink it. Maybe it'll make you feel better." The girl took a few sips. 3 minutes later, she felt better. The general weakness hadn't gone away, but at least she wasn't dizzy. At least something. The girl told her friend that she could go without her. "Really?" the blonde asked. She was very worried about her dark-haired friend. Lately, she had been acting very strangely, somehow too confused and dreamy. The blonde would have been happy to know what was going on, but her friend always said that everything was fine. She didn't want to involve anyone else in her affairs. And now, the dark-haired girl waved the blonde away like an annoying fly. He said, "Go now. There's no point in standing in an almost empty theater when you still have a lot of things to do." The blonde had to give up. The girl walked to the exit from the hall, stopping for a moment in front of the door. The blonde asked her friend to call her when she was home. The dark-haired girl nodded. When the blonde finally left the room, the girl leaned back in her soft chair and sighed with relief. "No, don't think so." The dark-haired girl adored her friend, but sometimes her excessive care tired her. The girl closed her eyes. She was going to rest a little before her father arrived, who had promised to pick her up. After a few minutes, the dark-haired girl raised the armrest and lay down to her full height. It was much more comfortable that way. The girl folded her hands on her stomach and immersed herself in thoughts about the concert. More precisely, about a young pianist. The dark-haired girl first heard him play a few years ago. It happened completely by chance. One of the girl's friends took her to a concert of a handsome guy named An Hee-won. The dark-haired woman knew him as the son of the founder of the INS group, an important figure in the arts. The girl believed that the young musician's popularity was due to his father's influence. After all, children of rich parents often received fame for nothing. However, the dark-haired girl changed her mind as soon as she heard An Hee-won's playing. The girl could not even imagine that such a soft and gentle, at first glance, person could play like that. So resolute and bright. The melody, which should have soothed and lulled, pierced the hearts of the listeners like an arrow and paralyzed them. Throughout the entire performance, the dark-haired woman could not move from her place. She was so enchanted by the young pianist's voice. A child's voice pulled the girl out of her thoughts about An Hee-won. "It's empty here, you can go." The dark-haired girl opened her eyes and hurried to sit down. The girl was about to leave the hall unnoticed when she heard another voice, deep and slightly hoarse. "Great, let's do it quickly before anyone else comes." The dark-haired girl froze in place. She would have recognized the owner of this voice out of 1,000 people. An Hee-won. The girl had no idea what he was doing here when his concert had ended a good half an hour ago. And why was there a child with him? The young pianist was not married and had no relationship. Did the dark-haired girl simply not know enough about him? The girl had many questions, and despite the fact that it was rude to interfere in other people's affairs, she was going to get the answers to them. The dark-haired girl crouched down so that no one would see her. Meanwhile, An Hee-won sat down at the piano and began to play. In the empty hall, the melody, adored by thousands, sounded somewhat ominous, but neither the musician nor the child seemed to be bothered by this. The changes in the game surprised only the dark-haired girl. From the first notes, the girl realized that something was wrong. The ominousness that was not inherent in this melody gradually turned into pure cruelty. And it scared the girl. The dark-haired woman screamed. At that moment, An Hee-won stopped playing. The child, who had been next to the musician all this time, asked him displeasedly why he had stopped. "Quiet," the man hissed. He was convinced that there was someone in the hall. And I wanted to find this someone as soon as possible. Otherwise, there could be problems. The dark-haired girl opened her eyes wide. She was feverishly considering what to do. Come out of her hiding place herself or wait until she was found. In the end, the girl chose the first option. She stood up abruptly. "Excuse me." The dark-haired girl hoped that she had been heard and that she would not have to repeat these words. She had never felt so embarrassed. No one answered the girl for a minute or two. The dark-haired girl squinted to see what was happening on the stage and froze in place. The fair-haired boy was on his knees, holding a beautiful young woman in his arms. And it would have been nothing if everything around wasn't covered in blood. But what surprised the dark-haired man most in this situation was An Hee-won's behavior. He stood with a cigarette clenched between his thin fingers and looked at the girl. He had an expression on his face as if nothing had happened, as if the pool of blood he was standing in was a completely normal occurrence. Is he really a murderer? Flashed through the dark-haired girl's mind. However, she wasn't going to ask him about it, of course. The only thing the dark-haired girl wanted at that moment was to get out of there safely. But first, the girl was going to explain to An Hee-won why she was here. The dark-haired girl said she felt dizzy, so she stayed in the hall for a while to rest. After that, the girl ran to the exit. An Hee-won silently watched her go. When the door closed behind the dark-haired girl, the boy who had been sitting silently all this time apologized to An Hee-won. The little boy believed that he had caused the pianist trouble and felt ashamed for it, but the musician didn't seem offended at all. He told the boy to leave the woman here and go home. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." An Hee-won's yellow-brown eyes flashed. Meanwhile, in the hallway, the dark-haired girl was quickly descending the stairs. At the same time, the girl kept looking around to make sure that no one was chasing her. She was scared as hell, which was completely normal. Anyone would be scared to see a famous musician, a little boy, and a bloodied woman in a concert hall. The dark-haired woman tripped over a step and fell onto the cold floor. Despite the pain in her knee, the girl managed to get up. She clasped her hands together to calm herself down a little. But the panic did not subside. The dark-haired girl did not know what to do: call the police, scream, or simply run away. The best option was to tell the cops what had happened, but the dark-haired girl had forgotten her purse with her phone in the concert hall. The girl ran to the large oak door and began to knock on it with all her might. She called for help, cried, but no one responded. This continued for several minutes until An Hee-won's voice was heard behind the girl. "Someone has been with you all this time." The dark-haired woman turned her head and froze in place. She was afraid to even move. Who knows what was on the mind of the man who had killed a person or was an accomplice in a murder? The musician smiled. He didn't want to scare the girl, but there was no point in telling her about it. She would hardly understand it in her condition. The man took the dark-haired girl's phone out of his jacket pocket. "Do you need this?" The musician said in a soft tone that, unfortunately, he couldn't give the dark-haired man her thing right now. An Hee-won hoped that his words wouldn't scare the poor guy even more. The dark-haired girl knelt down and folded her hands in a prayerful gesture. The girl closed her eyes and began to whisper an apology for seeing more than she should have. The dark-haired girl promised to never tell anyone about this situation. "Just spare me, please," she sobbed softly. An Hee-won sighed. Well, he would have to try very hard to calm the girl down and settle everything peacefully. The pianist got down on one knee in front of the dark-haired girl and quietly asked her name. The girl flinched. It seemed that the dark-haired girl thought this was some kind of special maneuver to trap her, but she couldn't help but answer either. The girl was afraid of angering An Hee-won by remaining silent, so after a few seconds, despite loud sobs and trembling throughout her body, the dark-haired girl was able to say her name. "Khan." The man raised his cigarette to his lips and thoughtfully repeated, "Khan, then." He was thinking about what to do with this young lady. As we have already understood, he was not going to kill her. But he could not just let her go either. What if she still tells someone about what she saw at the theater? An Hee-won decided that it would be best to explain everything to Kang. He looked at the girl and began his story. "You see, I am a little different from you." But the dark-haired woman didn't want to hear him. She repeated her apologies and her promise to remain silent like a mantra. An Hee-won fell silent. The man realized that Kang was unable to adequately perceive what he was saying. The voice of fear in her head shouted over the musician. An Hee-won stared at the floor. The man wanted to give the girl some time to understand for herself that she was not in danger. Suddenly, someone's quiet footsteps were heard. The musician turned his head and saw the blonde boy who was with him in the hall. The little one, who was holding a box with something in his hands, was smiling. "Are you going to kill this Nuna?" he asked. The dark-haired girl's blood ran cold. The girl thought that the boy was An Hee-won's accomplice. She began to tremble again and begged the pianist not to kill her. "I'm too young to die," she whispered. An Hee-won put his hand to his forehead and closed his eyes. He had to admit that he was a little tired of this little spectacle. Only the dark-haired girl had calmed down more or less when the little one appeared, who frightened her even more. "Alexei Richter," the pianist said in a somewhat irritated tone. "Your ability to show up at the wrong time sometimes amazes me." But the little guy didn't even bat an eye. He approached the girl and handed her a box of chocolates. "Eat." The dark-haired girl surprisingly accepted the gift. An Hee-won stood up and asked Alex what he was doing here. The pianist asked him to go home. Why did the little boy disobey him? But the boy again ignored the man's reproaches. Instead, he asked him not to kill the girl. The boy said that he had already eaten. And besides, her blood was tasteless because it contained very little sugar. The dark-haired girl, who had been listening attentively to their conversation, had already regretted 1,000 times that she had not accepted her friend's offer to go with her. Kan had not even been able to talk to her father one last time. Suddenly, the dark-haired girl dropped the box of sweets from her hands. The colorful dragies scattered. The girl began to quickly collect them. Kang put a few sweets in her mouth. They tasted quite pleasant and ordinary. An Hee-won told his little friend that he had been reckless in coming down here. The little one apologized to the musician. Kang stared at the two of them in silence. The pianist leaned over and whispered in the boy's ear that he was going to perform a trick with their new acquaintance. It would be easier than explaining everything to her. An Hee-won knelt down in front of Kang again and raised his hand to her face. Fortunately for the pianist, the girl did not move. The man made eye contact with her and began to say in a soft tone that it was all a dream. The girl was enveloped in warm magic, and she seemed to fall asleep. The dark-haired girl opened her eyes 10 minutes later, when she was blinded by the light from the lantern. "Why are you still here, miss?" The guard's voice reached the girl. The dark-haired girl clenched her hand into a fist out of excitement and said uncertainly that she had fallen asleep. The security guard asked her to leave as soon as possible, as he had to close the theater in half an hour. The dark-haired woman silently followed her husband. The events that had occurred in her strange dream were swirling in the girl's head. The murder of a beautiful woman, the fall from the stairs, the strange conversation with An Hee-won and the blonde boy. The girl lifted her skirt up a little to make sure there was nothing on her knee. The dark-haired girl sighed in relief when she saw a whole piece of smooth skin. So this was all just a figment of her imagination. The dark-haired girl adjusted the sleeve of her blouse when a small orange candy fell out. The girl's eyes widened. Where did she get that from? She never carried sweets with her, especially to concerts. The girl quickly found the candy with her eyes and picked it up. Memories flashed through the dark-haired girl's mind. An Hee-won's words about how he was different from other people, his thin fingers that almost touched her face. The dark-haired girl looked at the piano, which for some reason had not yet been removed from the stage. The girl thought she could still hear that melody, cruel and fierce. Only An Hee-won could play like that. Only him, and no one else. 4 months later, the dark-haired woman worked in an office. After that strange evening at the theater with Kan, nothing special had happened. And that made her a little sad. All the days were equally calm and gray. Kang even regretted a little that she hadn't listened to An Hee-won back then. Her life might have changed forever. The girl was pulled out of her thoughts by her colleague's voice. "Do you have any plans for the evening?" the dark-haired woman asked again. It seemed that she didn't immediately understand that she was being addressed. The woman had already turned her back on Kang and said that they would have to work after the workday was over. Kang didn't object, and not because she was afraid of her colleague's anger or was simply too soft-spoken. No, the dark-haired girl simply didn't want to argue. What difference did it make whether she spent the evening watching another TV series or writing reports? None of these things interested the girl. Yes, Kan certainly needed something new, something that could add a little variety to the gray everyday life. Maybe a meeting with old friends or a trip somewhere. A few seconds later, the girl's phone vibrated. Kang glanced at the screen. It was Jung, her old friend, the same blonde girl who had gone with her to one of An Hee-won's concerts. The dark-haired woman went out into the hallway and only then picked up the phone. Kang asked her friend what happened. The blonde replied that she was going to Seoul next week. She had quit her job. Kang wasn't too surprised by this fact. After all, her friend wasn't the kind of person who would spend years doing something they weren't interested in. The blonde suggested that the dark-haired girl go to the pastry shop they were planning to visit. Kang replied that she would be able to meet her friend. "I should have some free time next week," the dark-haired girl added. The girl didn't see her friend, but she guessed that she was happy. The following week, the dark-haired girl was sitting at a table in the same pastry shop, holding 2 tickets to the I&S Group art exhibition. They had been brought by Kang's friend. The girl imagined how much effort it had taken the blonde to get them. After all, tickets to such exhibitions sell like hotcakes. The blonde folded her hands together and smiled sweetly at Kang. "I barely managed to buy them. I had to ask a distant relative to get them, but it was worth it." Jung had wanted to go somewhere with the dark-haired girl for a long time. Kang shuddered, remembering how their last cultural outing had ended. But the blonde didn't let her say a word. She enthusiastically told her friend about the participants in the exhibition. According to gossips, all the artists of the I&S Group will be there, even those who usually do not appear in public. The dark-haired girl clutched the tickets in her hands. The girl convinced herself that what happened 4 months ago was a dream. So there was nothing to worry about, right? A few days later, the hall of the largest exhibition center in Korea. People were walking leisurely and looking at the paintings. Kang and Jung noticed a tall blonde woman in a red dress. "It's Adele Murtu!" the blonde exclaimed. Adele was the girl's favorite singer. She had long dreamed of getting her autograph. John attended almost all the events where Adele was, but the woman didn't often pay attention to her fans. She didn't like to interact with the audience off stage during her breaks. And now Adele didn't even look at John. The girl was a little upset about this, but not for long. A new star appeared in the hall, An Hee-won. He came to the event with his sister, a talented artist, An Ji-won. Both were dressed simply impeccably. An's black suit matched Ji-won's white translucent dress. If people didn't know that these two were brother and sister, they would definitely take them for a couple. An Hee-won, like a true gentleman, helped his sister sit down in one of the soft chairs. Kang silently watched the pianist and the artist. The girl remembered that An Hee-won doesn't smoke because his sister has asthma. So it turns out that what Kang saw 4 months ago was really a dream. After all, An Hee-won was holding a cigarette in his hands at that time. John, meanwhile, had already managed to get an autograph from the musician. The blonde turned her head towards Kun and asked if she wanted to do the same. "You're probably the biggest fan of his work," John said. The dark-haired girl forced a smile. She was ready to strangle her friend for such amateurism. Kang decided to pretend that she had forgotten An Hee-won's CD at home, so unfortunately she wouldn't be able to get an autograph. The blonde immediately exposed her friend. Jung told An Hee-won not to listen to the dark-haired man. She always carries a few of his CDs with her. The pianist laughed softly. He was amused by the blonde's persistence and the dark-haired man's indecision. The man convinced Jung that he would give her friend an autograph. His colleague Adele happened to have a few CDs. He asked the woman to give them to him, which she graciously agreed to. The man scribbled a pen on one of the CDs and asked the dark-haired woman her name. The girl smiled sadly. An Hee-won's question was another confirmation that she had dreamed that scene in the hall. After all, that evening the dark-haired girl had told the man that her name was Kang. The girl repeated her name. An Hee-won gave his admirer the disc and thanked her for her devoted love for him and his work. Suddenly, the dark-haired girl felt that strange warmth that had enveloped her in that dream. The thought occurred to Kang that perhaps what she had seen that night had not been a dream. The girl shuddered at the suggestion, even though it seemed somewhat absurd to her. After all, she had already found so much evidence to the contrary. But still, the girl decided to test her theory. There was one way to do it. The dark-haired girl went to the restroom before telling her friend that she would be leaving for a moment. Kang took out her phone from her pocket and found a photo in the gallery. It showed the stars of the evening. Among them, the dark-haired girl was most interested in the blonde boy standing next to An Hee-won's sister. The dark-haired girl was sure that she had seen him in her dream. She would never forget those sweet eyes. Khan began to search for information about him on the internet. The little one, named Alex Richter, was a child prodigy in the field of painting. At such a young age, he had already created several sculptures that were bought for several $1,000,000 each. The dark-haired woman remembered the little boy's face that evening. His mouth was bloody. And that woman, the woman he held in his arms, was she dead? What happened to her now? The dark-haired girl had many questions, but one thing she knew for sure was that it wasn't a dream. Khan stared at the floor. The girl thought about what to do. She definitely wouldn't be able to pretend everything was fine, but she also couldn't tell anyone about it. It's unlikely that a sane person would believe it. Suddenly, the dark-haired girl heard An Hee-won's voice. "So you remember everything," the man said. The dark-haired woman looked around sharply but saw no one. The dark-haired woman thought she had dreamed. Then An Hee-won appeared in the mirror, and there was a cigarette in the man's fingers. Like that evening. Kang was about to run out of the restroom when An Hee-won's arms grabbed her. The man held her waist gently and firmly at the same time. He flashed his eyes and told the girl that he had prepared everything to talk to her. Tears welled up in the dark-haired girl's eyes. She was scared of this man again. Kang could never forget the pool of blood in which he stood on the stage. Was the young pianist really a murderer? And if he attacks her now? The girl became even more agitated. An Hee-won noticed this. He sighed and told the girl that she should go for contact. Otherwise, they might have a little trouble. The girl took this phrase as a threat and began to sob. Through her sobs, she shouted that she would tell everyone that the pianist had been clinging to her. But the musician was not frightened or angry. He said in a calm tone that Khan had no evidence. Then he looked into the dark-haired woman's eyes and asked her where they were. The dark-haired woman was a little surprised by this question. "What do you mean? Where?" "In the women's restroom, of course." The man advised the girl to look around. The dark-haired woman turned her head to the side and cried out. The simple but elegant interior of the dressing room changed into a grand hall with a piano in the middle. An Hee-won lightly squeezed Kang's shoulder and said that they were in his studio. The dark-haired girl looked down at the floor. There were shards of glass lying there. "A broken mirror," the girl guessed. So it turns out she got to this place through an ordinary mirror in the bathroom. The man noticed the girl's surprise. He touched the piano with his hand and said that he could move in space. This was one of the abilities of the first. The dark-haired girl opened her eyes wide. Spurvia. She had never heard that word before. Are they some kind of magical creatures or something? What if they are dangerous? The dark-haired girl was about to scream when An Hee-won stopped her. He warned the girl that if she behaved loudly, she would suffer for it. Then he would tell the others that she had been following him. The pianist's eyes flashed. "I will beat you with your own weapon, Miss Khan." The dark-haired girl stepped back and tripped over something, falling to the floor. The girl asked An Hee-won who the hell he was, and why did he bring her here? Does he want to commit another murder or what? The pianist broke into a mocking smile and took a cigarette out of his trouser pocket. He inhaled the bitter smoke, then said that he would not answer all the girl's questions one by one. As for the man's essence, he is a being who can collect other people's memories. The dark-haired woman asked why she remembered everything that happened that evening. The man replied that his spell simply didn't work on her. The dark-haired girl asked why this had happened. Was she really something special? The man lowered his hand with the cigarette. He had thought about it himself, but he couldn't find any reason why the girl had managed to counteract his magic. That's why the pianist brought the dark-haired man to his studio. He wanted to talk to him and find out everything. "But you shouldn't consider yourself special." The man put out his cigarette. "After all, you're just an ordinary person." The dark-haired girl clenched her hand into a fist. Although the girl did not claim to be a superhuman, she was still hurt by the pianist's words. It seemed to Khan that he wanted to insult and humiliate her. But okay, this is not the time for insults. The dark-haired woman decided that it would be better to find out who the firstborns were. She asked the man to tell her about these creatures. He replied that the firstborns were the embodiment of mortal sins. "For example, I am a pride." The man lowered his head. "As for food, the Spreevy feed on human feelings, absorbing ecstasy. Mere mortals also call these creatures incubi." The man began to list everything that people like him consume. Joy, fear, sadness, anger, shame. "But that night the child drank blood." The girl dared to interrupt the pianist. Han Hee-won just smiled. He and Alex are of different species. The little genius is a ghoul or a vampire, but just because Richter ravages human bodies doesn't mean he's bad. The little one just has no other choice, like other such creatures. The dark-haired woman carefully moved away from the man. Had he brought her here to eat? I wonder if she would survive. Because technically, ecstasy is not as necessary for existence as blood. Kang decided to ask the pianist about it carefully. He shook his head. He wasn't going to feed on her emotions. They wouldn't bring pleasure to a man, and he didn't want to eat anything. And besides, it wouldn't be nutritious at all. An Hee-won leaned over to the dark-haired woman and touched her chin with his hand. The musician said that to eat, he needed a lot of emotions, and the dark-haired woman could only offer fear right now. Well, and maybe a little indignation. The man said that the first ones have been studying human emotions from a long time ago in terms of utility. People do the same with ordinary products. The man approached the piano and touched the keys with his fingers. The greatest number of vivid and nourishing emotions can be obtained through art. It excites people, reveals something completely new in them, something they themselves had no idea existed. The dark-haired woman shuddered. So the pianist eats with the help of his playing. The man nodded and added that for his sister, drawing is a way to make a living. The girl looked at her husband with wide eyes. What she learned, of course, shocked her. But now the dark-haired woman was much more interested in her own fate. The musician never answered what he would do with her. The man said he needed to think. Think? The dark-haired woman asked. So maybe he wouldn't kill her. Well, that's not bad. An Hee-won said it was very easy to take a person's life, and hiding a corpse so that no one would find it is also not difficult. But the man simply did not like killing. It was too boring for him. And he, as we have already understood, was not used to doing boring things. But you see, An Hee-won began, I can't just let you go. The dark-haired woman asked what the musician wanted from her. The man smiled faintly. Finally, they got down to business. The musician brushed a speck of dust off his shoulder and said that Alex, whom he sometimes helps, had some problems. But they could be solved with the help of Khan. First, the girl needs to be marked. The alarm clock rang. The dark-haired girl opened her eyes and looked at the phone screen. 9 in the morning. Khan looked around. She was in her room. So, did she have another bad dream? The dark-haired girl stood up and went to the mirror. Thin pajamas instead of a black dress. Disheveled hair instead of a more or less neat hairstyle. Suddenly, Kang noticed a small red spot on her neck. You might have thought it was some kind of insect bite, but the dark-haired girl remembered An Hee-won's words about the mark well. So Kang concluded that she definitely hadn't dreamed it all. Then someone rang the doorbell at the girl's apartment. The dark-haired woman went to the door and glanced at the intercom screen. A thin woman in a blue jacket and a cap that covered almost half of her face. Kang was surprised. She asked the stranger who she was. The woman replied that she was a member of the INS group community. The dark-haired woman had spoken to her brother yesterday. Kang froze in place. Brother? Meanwhile, the stranger leaned towards the door. The dark-haired woman looked closely and realized that the stranger behind the door was An Ji-won, a famous artist throughout Korea. An Ji-won asked the girl to finally open the door. I don't like waiting on the doorstep for a long time. The artist smiled. The dark-haired girl hurried to turn the key in the lock. An Ji-won entered the apartment. The woman glanced at the dark-haired girl, who was still in her pajamas, and told her to get ready. They didn't have much time, but Kang couldn't move. Although the dark-haired woman had been complaining about her quiet life for a few days, now she would give a lot to get back the time when she could work peacefully in the office and watch TV series after work. An Ji-won noticed a mark on the girl's neck. The artist took a step toward the dark-haired girl to examine the mark. The woman said it was the mark of a contract her brother had made with Kang. The dark-haired woman asked what contract she was talking about. The artist explained the terms of the agreement to the dark-haired woman in an indifferent tone. If Kang told anyone about the characteristics of An Hee-won and his family and friends, she would die. The girl stared at the artist in silence. Will she die? If An Hee-won had said something like that, she would definitely have remembered. The artist sat down on the sofa. She seemed not at all bothered by Kang's behavior. The artist didn't even try to calm her down or bring her out of her stupor. For some reason, the dark-haired woman asked how exactly she would die if she violated the terms of the contract. The artist's eyes twinkled slyly. Do you really want to know? Kang nodded uncertainly. Not that the girl was particularly interested in her own death, but at least she would know what to prepare for. An Ji-won leaned back on the sofa. "Your brain will pop like a balloon." The girl opened her eyes wide. Quite an original way to die. An Ji-won told the dark-haired one to go take a shower and clean herself up. It wasn't very polite to go to someone else's house in pajamas. The girl nervously tugged at her hand. "Just now?" The woman nodded and said that from now on they would come for Khan every day. According to the terms of the contract, the girl was obliged to be Alex Richter's food and punching bag. The dark-haired girl entered the bathroom, closed the door and leaned her back against it. The girl tried to remember how she had made a deal with An Hee-won. Kang closed her eyes and sighed. Suddenly memories began to appear in her head, merging into a coherent picture. The pianist's workshop. The man who was already smoking his 10th cigarette said that Alex needed food, and Khan was excellent food. She may not be very sweet, but in conditions of food shortage, little Richter would be happy with that. The dark-haired girl timidly said that she could hardly be anyone's food. Firstly, she was anemic, and secondly, a vampire bite was fatal. The man smiled. He wasn't surprised that the dark-haired woman believed all this nonsense about vampires and magical creatures in general. But the musician was going to dispel her illusions. Vampires don't kill their victims unless they have to. As for anemia, don't worry, there are spells that will keep your health normal. The man shrugged. The dark-haired woman wondered why he was so concerned about the boy. Is little Richter a relative of An Hee-won or something? The musician froze in place. The cigarette burned his thin fingers a little, but he didn't pay attention to it. The pianist thought about what to say to the girl. After all, he said that he was keeping the promise he had made to his old friend. And in general, it had nothing to do with the dark-haired man. The man glared angrily, letting the girl know that she shouldn't stick her nose in other people's business. All they ask of her is a small amount of blood, and help Alex with his homework. The dark-haired woman bowed her head and clenched her hands into fists. She was very annoyed by her husband's impudent behavior. The dark-haired girl was not going to obey him so easily. The girl gathered all the remnants of her courage and with a slight tremor in her voice, said that she would not help either An Hee-won or his pupil. She didn't want to be a household pet for magical creatures. The man's eyes widened. Although the dark-haired woman was an ordinary person, he had to admit that he had never met anyone so strange. The girl could resist his charms and could defend her sense of self-esteem. Yes, she interested the musician, but he was not going to talk about it. At least, it would be ugly if this young lady showed off. Let her think that she is really just a pet, from whom they want to get as much benefit as possible. The dark-haired woman tried to express her indignation to her husband about this, but he silenced her with just a look. The musician smiled mockingly and said that humans meant nothing to magical creatures. They were just food and nothing more. Cruel? Maybe, but that's the way the world is. The dark-haired woman did not take her eyes off the musician. The girl felt very offended, but she remained silent, because she already understood that this was the best option. After all, the man responded very harshly to every word she said. An Hee-won leaned into the dark-haired woman's neck and whispered that his words were not an offer to cooperate. The man simply gave the dark-haired woman a choice: continue living her usual life or disappear without a trace. The girl didn't even have time to say a word when An Hee-won pressed his lips to her neck. Kang cried out in surprise. The man pressed her closer to him, so he concluded a contract with the dark-haired girl, practically without her consent. Kang emerged from her memories. The girl felt terrible. An Hee-won, the young and talented pianist she adored, turned out to be a real monster. Suddenly, the dark-haired girl heard An Ji-won's displeased voice. "How long are you going to wait?" The artist was already tired of waiting for the dark-haired girl. The girl shouted that she would be out in 10 minutes. A month later, the dark-haired girl once again came to the house where little Richter lived. The boy greeted Kang and asked how she got here. "Did that nun give you a ride again?" The little one was talking about An Hee-won's sister. The dark-haired girl nodded her head in confusion. Alex said the girl was pale. Kang laughed insincerely. And what else could she be after traveling with An Hee-won's sister? An Ji-won turned out to be that little thing. In a month, the dark-haired woman learned a lot about the artist. First, her shyness was just a mask. An Ji-won loved to make noise and make caustic comments towards people she didn't like. Secondly, the woman loved to smoke. The dark-haired woman was very surprised when she saw An Ji-won with a cigarette in her hand. "You have asthma." The artist just laughed at this. In fact, she did not have asthma. Her diagnosis was just a touching story for a sensitive audience. Third, An Ji-won simply loved speed. Every ride with her turned into a game of survive or die. Fortunately, nothing critical happened during the month that the dark-haired woman traveled with the woman. Well, except for the dented bumper of someone else's car. But the artist promised to fix everything. Kang smiled when she remembered that. Alex approached the girl and said he was glad to see her. Despite the creepy peculiarity of this little one, the dark-haired man liked him. The boy seemed to Khan the most normal of all her new acquaintances. After signing a contract with An Hee-won, the dark-haired girl became Alex's home tutor. Not to say that the girl really wanted it, but she had no choice. And studying with little Richter was quite interesting. He knew a lot and was friendly towards the dark-haired girl. The little one smiled sweetly. "This morning I tried to charm people with the art of sculpture." The boy took a few pieces of chocolate from a small vase on the table and handed them to Kan. The girl thanked the boy and asked if he wanted to practice on her. Alex refused. He had already eaten properly. The dark-haired girl was surprised. When did he have time? The boy said that he had eaten at one of An Hee-won's recent concerts, but the little one really liked the blood. The girl involuntarily shuddered. Because of Richter's kind behavior, she almost forgot that he was not a human, but a bloodthirsty monster. Orphans appeared on the dark-haired girl's skin. What if the little guy wanted to kill her one day? But Kang quickly pushed these thoughts away. You shouldn't push yourself too hard. If you're constantly afraid, you can go crazy. And she didn't want this dark-haired guy. She had been just a step away from madness recently anyway. The girl felt uncomfortable with her own thoughts, so she decided to talk to young Richter about something. A topic for conversation was found very quickly. A pleasant melody came from the next room. The dark-haired girl guessed that it was Hee-won's playing. Little Alex said that the man was almost never apart from his piano, and not just because art was his only way to eat. No, An Hee-won really loved what he did. The man was a unique musician. He interpreted world-famous compositions in his own way. Kan closed her eyes and leaned back on the sofa. The dark-haired woman enjoyed the musician's playing. She could listen to his melodies forever. Alex noticed the girl's relaxed expression and slyly said that she seemed to be a fan of An Hee-won. The dark-haired girl blushed but didn't deny it. And what's the point if little Richter doesn't believe her? He's not so easy to fool. But fortunately, the boy quickly switched to another topic. He wanted to tell the girl about magical creatures. Kang perked up. On the night of the contract, An Hee-won had given her some information about the Inhumans, but it wasn't enough to make sense of it all. Little Richter said that he and An Hee-won were of the night race. The night race, in turn, is divided into several types. The most common of them are mermaids, elves, werewolves, and demons. Within each type, there are also higher beings, a kind of ruling class, who are part of the Dark Knight community. An Hee-won is one of the higher beings. He is a priest. There are only a few like him, like a musician. Alex Richter is an ordinary vampire, and a half-blood. The little one's mother was an ordinary person, and his father was a bloodsucker. When Alex was born, the Richter family was obsessed with killing him. They believed the baby was a monster, not worth living. The boy was saved by An Hee-won. He took the boy to his home and implanted the monster's heart into his body. When the boy becomes a full-fledged vampire, the musician will cut out his heart to revive the dead monster. The dark-haired man was struck by the boy's story. The girl felt sorry for him. Is it possible to do this? To use a child as a vessel to store the heart of a monster? Kan considered it disgusting and immoral. Little Richter had a different view of the situation. He was grateful to An Hee-won. If it weren't for the musician, the boy would have been killed as an infant, and at least he would have been able to live to adulthood. The dark-haired girl asked Richter who the monster was whose heart was beating inside his body. Gulbacha, the little one replied. A tall blonde man, just like An Hee-won told me about him. Gulbacha, like the musician, belonged to the priests, so it is not surprising that his heart is very important to the community of magical beings. In addition to Gulbacha's part, little Richter also kept his jewel. The boy untied his tie and carefully pushed back the collar of his shirt. The dark-haired girl saw a thin silver chain on which hung a massive red stone. Alex said that this jewel was called the Heart of Lilith. Lilith is the progenitor of almost all magical beings. She created them from the 7 deadly sins and then enclosed her powers in 7 precious stones. These are usually kept by priests. But Lilith's heart was an exception to the rule, and Hivan had given the jewel to little Richter to make the process of Gulbaha's resurrection easier in the future. Alex frowned and clenched the stone in his small hand. Richter, despite his tender age, took the mission entrusted to him very seriously. The dark-haired girl asked the boy where Anhiwan had gotten Lilith's heart from. The boy replied that Gulbaha had given the musician the jewel. The blonde priest felt his death approaching, so he took care of the possibility of his rebirth in advance. Alex quickly hid the stone under his shirt and flashed his green eyes. Well, at least that's what they say. Gulbaha's trust in Anhiwan could be explained by their friendship. In the past, they had traveled together and collected jewels of every kind. In addition, the 2 priests had similar personalities. They were both known to be cruel and somewhat hot-tempered beings. And not in vain. Gulbaha killed his own father and became emperor of the ancient kingdom. But the fair-haired man was not destined to rule happily ever after. It was rumored that the spirit of the deceased emperor cursed his own son, depriving him of his mind. New York. An apartment in a megacity. In a bright, spacious room, Anjiwan sat on the sofa, dressed in a white dress decorated with flowers and butterflies. The woman, as always, was smoking a cigarette. "Why are you asking me about the curse of eternal life?" the artist asked the person in the next room. This person was Khan. The girl was looking at herself in the mirror. The dark-haired woman replied to her interlocutor that Alex had told her about Gulbash, and had mentioned that Anjiwan's sister knew more about it than he did. Anjiwan arched an eyebrow. She was surprised that Richter would talk about such serious things with a mere mortal. The little guy was not one for frivolity. Well, if he did that, then Kang could probably be trusted. Anjiwan inhaled the cigarette smoke. She said that eternal life could hardly be considered a curse. "For example, I got it thanks to An Hee-wan." The woman's voice softened. The artist thought that the man had acted very mercifully towards her. After all, not every priest would help a poor dying creature, even if that creature was his sister. Khan lowered her head. The dark-haired man was not very pleased to realize that the musician was friendly to everyone except humans. No, he certainly followed the basic rules of politeness. But when it came to anything more than basic conversation, An Hee-wan put on a mask of indifference. Kang remembered how the man had called her a bitch during tea. Even Alex, who was also present at the event, was surprised by such a statement towards his Nuna. But that day, An Hee-wan caused the dark-haired woman much more grief than verbal rudeness. The man told Kang that she was going to New York with Alex. The dark-haired girl didn't really like the prospect of finding herself in a strange city alone with magical creatures. But no one asked her. An Ji-wan asked why Kang was standing in the bathtub for so long. The girl flinched in surprise. "Is everything okay? Is the dress too small or too big?" The artist was worried. The dark-haired woman said that everything was okay. She just didn't feel comfortable receiving such an expensive dress as a gift. But for Anne's incredibly wealthy family, designer clothes cost next to nothing, so the dark-haired woman shouldn't have worried about the price of the dress. A few minutes later, Kang finally emerged from the bath. The black dress with the open top suited the dark-haired woman very well. An Ji-wan noted this dryly and grabbed the dark-haired woman's hand. They had to hurry. Kang noticed how the woman's expression changed. He became somewhat unhappy. An Ji-wan said that was how it should be. She was simply playing the role of An Hee-wan's shy, innocent sister, an artist with a very delicate mental organization. That was how she wanted to appear to the public. The woman asked the dark-haired woman if she smelled of cigarettes. How much noise could be made if someone found out that the sickly-looking An Ji-wan smoked like a steam locomotive? Fortunately, there was no smell left. The ladies went down to the first floor, where makeup artists were already waiting for them. Khan did an incredible makeup. The girl had never seen herself so beautiful. An Ji-wan smiled at the corner of her mouth and took out a bottle of perfume from her purse. The woman carefully sprayed it on the dark-haired girl's neck. Kang said she couldn't smell anything. An Ji-wan's eyes twinkled and she began to explain the effects of the perfume to the dark-haired girl. It turned out that it only had a scent for magical creatures. The artist had used it on Kang to notice the girl. It sounds strange, but it is. Magical creatures that smell this smell will understand that the dark-haired woman is someone's personal food. and will not touch her. Kang asked the woman about the mark that An Hee-won had once placed on her. The girl thought that the mark had disappeared from her body. At least in the morning, she no longer saw the small red spot on her neck in the mirror. An Ji-won walked over to Kang and ran her thin fingers over the girl's shoulder. The artist said that the mark was still there. It was just not as bright now. The woman saw that Kang was a little upset by her words, so she decided to change the subject. She asked the dark-haired girl to hold on to An Hee-won at the party. The dark-haired girl asked why. An Ji-won pulled the girl by the hand. How come? Why? He is the priest of the first, one of the most powerful magical beings. You will definitely be completely safe next to him. Kang and the artist left the apartment and went down to the first floor of the house. An Hee-won was already waiting for them outside. The man smiled softly at Kang and said that she looked absolutely amazing today. The dark-haired woman blushed. An Hee-won had never complimented her before, but now this happened. The girl wanted to thank her, but the man moved away from her and started talking to his sister. It was unpleasant, but completely expected. Alex, who was waiting outside with his guardian, told the dark-haired woman to get in the car. A security guard in a black suit opened the car door for Khan. The dark-haired woman sank down on the soft leather seat when An Hee-won's hands touched her. The man leaned towards the dark-haired woman and buried his nose in her hair. Kang closed her eyes. She felt good and scared at the same time from the man's touch. You never know what to expect from him. Suddenly, he wants to put another mark on the dark-haired man. But the girl's suspicions were dispelled when the man moved away from her a little and spoke to his sister. How much perfume did you spray on her? An Ji-won, who was busy looking at herself in the small mirror, replied that she had sprayed perfume on the dark-haired girl's neck twice, once on the left and once on the right. The man said that this was not enough. He asked his sister to give him the perfume and reached for Khan again. The girl was indignant, but the pianist paid no attention to this. He carefully sprinkled a little perfume on the dark-haired girl's shoulder. Half an hour passed. The Hee-won family's car stopped in front of a huge building that looked like an elite hotel. The dark-haired woman got out of the car and opened her eyes wide. How beautiful! Alex smiled. The little one understood his Nuna's delight. He guessed that not all mere mortals could afford a luxurious life. But for magical creatures, designer clothes and huge houses were not something extraordinary. Suddenly, the dark-haired girl heard an unfamiliar voice. The girl turned her head and saw that An Hee-won was talking to a tall, fair-haired man. The stranger looked a lot like Kang Alex. The girl assumed they were related. An Hee-won confirmed her assumption when he called the blonde man Mr. Richter. The musician's voice was cold. It seemed that he was not very happy to meet one of the Richters. And the girl was not surprised. How could one accept people who wanted to kill a baby normally? Mr. Richter tilted his head to the side and in a feignedly polite tone thanked the An family for taking care of his nephew. Hee-won and Ji-won were silent. The blonde noticed Kang and smiled predatorily. The man told the pianist that Alex had gotten a good Rolton. The dark-haired woman pursed her lips. Again, those taunts from the magical creatures. She was used to them, thinking they were better than others. An Hee-won frowned. He didn't seem to like Richter's words. The musician told the blonde that he would talk to him later. The pianist was about to leave when Mr. Richter asked him to stay for a moment. The blonde man glanced at Alex and his eyes twinkled. The man expressed a desire to chat with his beloved nephew. Alex tensed up. He didn't want to talk to Richter Sr. The dark-haired girl lightly squeezed the boy's shoulder. He said everything would be fine. The girl hoped that they would ignore the blonde's request and leave. But An Hee-won had other plans. The musician turned his head towards Alex and told him to talk to his uncle for a moment before returning to them. Kang's eyes widened. Was the pianist really going to leave the little one with this monster? How is that even possible? An Hee-won ran his hand over the boy's head and said in a soothing tone that everything was fine. The musician asked his sister to stay with the little one, just in case. An Ji-won silently nodded her head. The woman approached the blonde and bowed to him. She said that she had long been interested in the works of the elder Richter. Alex smiled. If An Ji-won was behaving like this, then the situation was definitely under control. The boy went to his relatives while the woman stood aside. An Hee-won leaned towards her and said that he would be with Kang on the roof. Before leaving, the man took off his jacket and threw it over the woman's shoulders. The musician turned to Khan. He noticed the concern on the girl's face, so he smiled encouragingly at her. The man took her by the elbow and led her towards the entrance to the building. A few minutes later, the dark-haired man and the pianist were already riding in the elevator. The girl asked An Hee-won if everything would be okay with Alex and An Ji-won. She was very worried about these two, even though they were non-humans. The pianist sighed and with a hint of irritation in his voice replied that his sister and Alex could get it. The dark-haired girl froze in place. She expected a different answer from the musician. The girl thought he had left Ji-won and Alex with the elder Richter because he was sure they were safe. An Hee-won ignored the range of emotions on Kang's face. Instead, he decided to talk to her about something. The man asked the dark-haired girl if Alex had told her about the jewel. She replied uncertainly that she had heard of something like that. An Hee-won stated that the elder Richter and his gang would try to take the jewel from the little one. For the girl, things became even more confusing. If the musician knew that the blonde vampire was preparing an attack on his nephew, then why did he leave? The man replied that this would give the An family a reason to attack the Richters. As soon as one of the vampires touched Alex, Hee-won would be able to attack her enemies without any problems. As far as I'm concerned, the man smiled faintly, it's a brilliant plan. But the dark-haired woman didn't think so. What if something happens to Alex? The man replied that that was why he left Ji-won with the little one. The immortal artist would definitely be able to pull the little one out of the other world if anything. The couple got out of the elevator. An Hee-won's words calmed the dark-haired girl somewhat, but she still thought his action was disgusting. Poor Ji-won would have to face the vampires alone. And besides, if Alex didn't die, it didn't mean he wouldn't be harmed. Little Richter could be seriously injured, but the musician doesn't seem to care at all. The dark-haired woman stood in front of An Hee-won and exclaimed that he was a narcissistic turkey who only cared about himself and his precious friend. An Hee-won broke into a mocking smile. It seems our Miss Kang found out about Gulbaha Aziz Shahar. The man mentally cursed Alex for spilling all the secrets to a mere mortal. No, An Hee-won trusted Kang. It was just that the more the girl knew, the harder it was to make her obey. But maybe the man should be a little softer with her, An Hee-won thought. The dark-haired woman was one of those people who panicked easily and were afraid of almost everything in the world, but at the same time had a keen sense of justice. Yes, you definitely can't scare such people. The man leaned his elbows on the railing. After a few seconds, he said softly that Kang misunderstood him. Alex will be fine. Ji-won is much stronger than some people think. Besides, the musician gave her cigarettes. They act as a catalyst. The substances they contain penetrate the brain and provoke active mental activity. So, thanks to what Ji-won will be able to quickly orient himself. An Hee-won directed his gaze towards the elevator. The number 36 was displayed on the small screen. The musician said that his enemies would arrive here soon. My trap worked. The man was proud of himself. Kang's eyes widened in surprise. It turns out that the man had no intention of giving his sister and pet to the vampires. Ji-won and Alex were just bait. When the number on the elevator screen changed to 45, An Hee-won threw Kang over his shoulder. The dark-haired girl screamed in surprise. The man only smiled at that. He was in a wonderful mood. Now it was obvious that nothing would happen to Alex. And Khan, who adored the little vampire so much, would not be harmed either. An Hee-won expressed his hope that the dark-haired girl would do whatever he said. The girl didn't answer. She completely ignored the pianist's words. It's hard to listen to someone when you're hanging at a height of several dozen meters. An Hee-won decided to share his next plan with Kang. At first, the man wanted to change the location. The dark-haired woman happily agreed to this. She was very afraid of heights. The only question is how to get down from the 70th floor. The elevator is busy and there are no stairs. The dark-haired woman looked at Hee-won. He blinked and said that they would jump. The girl's blood froze in her veins. Will they jump? This is madness. But the man didn't let Kang say a word. He hugged her to him and threw himself from the edge of the roof. The dark-haired girl grabbed Hee-won's shoulder with her fingers. The man laughed. He was definitely enjoying this day. Suddenly, a bullet flew a few centimeters from the dark-haired girl's ear. The girl screamed and buried her nose in Hee-won's neck. The smile momentarily disappeared from the man's face. He realized that he would not be able to avoid a clash with the enemies of the An family. Several more bullets flew past the couple. The man ran his hand along Kang's back. He hoped the girl wasn't too scared. Kang was silent. Well, then everything is under control, An Hee-won said in his mind. He held out his hand and black smoke began to appear from it, which in a moment turned into a gun. The man tightened his grip on the dark-haired woman's waist. Kang realized that shooting was about to happen, so she hugged the man tightly around the neck and tilted her head slightly to the side so as not to interfere with the musician's aim. A few seconds passed. Shots were fired. The enemies tried to hit the pianist or Khan, but it was all in vain. The man with the girl in his arms somehow managed to constantly dodge the bullets. A shot from An Hee-won. Someone on the roof roared. It seemed the man had hit one of his pursuers. The shot stopped. The enemies decided to leave An Hee-won for a while. The gun disappeared from the musician's hands. Kang's mouth dropped open in surprise. With each minute spent with An Hee-won, this man seemed more and more strange to the girl. Suddenly, the musician grabbed the canvas of the billboard they were flying past with his hand. The fabric couldn't withstand the weight of the man and his companion, and it tore. The dark-haired woman shouted to An Hee-won to do something. The ground was not far away, and they would surely crash if the man didn't find a way to soften the fall. Fortunately, the musician was not confused. He waved his hand with the cloth, but she tensed up, forming a kind of parachute. True, An Hee-won's invention didn't slow down the couple's flight much. The dark-haired woman dared to look down. Below them was a glass ceiling. An Hee-won, the girl called softly. The man looked down and cursed. Things were really bad. Maybe he and Kang wouldn't crash, but they would definitely get hurt. Suddenly, the man had a good idea. He wrapped the cloth around himself and the dark-haired woman. This makeshift cloak was supposed to protect the couple from the shards of glass. A few seconds later, till Kang and An Hee-won broke through the ceiling. The couple fell to the floor. The people in the hall stared at the newcomers. An Hee-won stood up and looked around to see who he would have to deal with now. Kang was sitting on the floor, muttering something under her breath. Suddenly, several men simultaneously took out pistols from their holsters and pointed them at the musician. He sighed. Another shooting? How banal. Are they really so stupid that they don't know other methods of neutralizing the enemy? One of the shooters ordered An Hee-won to stay put, but the man seemed to ignore his words. He took a cigarette out of his pants pocket and lit it. At that moment, several shots rang out. The musician, with an indifferent expression on his face, snapped his fingers, and the bullets turned in the other direction. A moment later, they struck those who had fired them. The men fell to the floor. An Hee-won grunted. "It's your own fault," he said. "You shouldn't have rushed in." Then the dark-haired woman, who had already more or less come to her senses, called out to the man. Kang was very angry with An Hee-won for having tripped during the fall. "This show was useless," the dark-haired girl muttered. "What if we crashed?" The man waved Kang away like a pesky fly. An Hee-won said she was boring. He just wanted their fall to be like a moment from Tarzan. The dark-haired girl opened her eyes wide. She would never have thought that a creature like An Hee-won watched ordinary movies. But no matter. Kang was worried about something else. The girl, with a hint of indignation in her voice, asked the man what kind of black smoke that had suddenly turned into a gun was. Hee-won was a little offended that the dark-haired woman had called one of his abilities a strange smoke. If it weren't for that smoke, her body would have already been torn to pieces by vampires and other magical creatures. The dark-haired woman frowned and said that she didn't like the fact that An Hee-won had killed people in the hall without a qualm. "They're not human," the man reminded Kang. But the dark-haired woman was not reassured. She still considered An Hee-won's actions illegal and immoral. By the way, about the law. Kang asked the musician if magical creatures were punished for murder. The man's eyes twinkled. He was amused by the dark-haired girl's curiosity. Despite her fear of the new world she had been forced into, the girl was eager to learn as much information as possible about its inhabitants. The musician was about to make fun of Khan about this, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a huge purple wolf appeared in front of the man and the girl. Its yellow eyes burned with an unkind fire. The beast growled at An Hee-won, but the man was not at all frightened. Instead, he smiled and raised his hand. The wolf froze in place, changing his mind about attacking the pianist. It seemed that An Hee-won liked him. The man ran his hand over the beast's thick fur. The dark-haired woman watched as if spellbound. An Hee-won told her that the purple wolf was a pet of the elder Richter or someone in his entourage. The man looked the animal in the eyes and in a firm but calm tone ordered the wolf to bite its master. "Kill everyone who comes near him." The musician seemed to have conducted a hypnosis session for the animal, and the session was quite successful. The wolf turned his back on An Hee-won and ran away. The dark-haired woman was once again amazed that evening. Even more so. Who would calmly accept a creature that can hypnotize animals and create things from smoke? The dark-haired woman moved away from the man a little, and quietly asked who he really was. An Hee-won tilted his head to the side and smiled. "Only a being who can turn dreams into reality." This was another joke from the man. Of course, he had a lot of abilities, but he couldn't transform people. Only a goddess had such a skill. An Hee-won held out his hand to the dark-haired man. They needed to hurry. "We must return the Jewel of Greed," the man said. The dark-haired woman stood up and asked An Hee-won if he was talking about Alex's heart. The musician was momentarily confused. He asked the girl how much she knew. Khan lowered her head and replied that she had heard that something extremely valuable was stored in the boy's heart, something that would help revive Gulba. And when Alex grows up, An Hee-won will cut open his heart to get the treasure hidden inside. The man snorted and said that little Richter was wrong. He wasn't going to destroy his heart. The girl's eyes widened. "What?" An Hee-won didn't answer. He turned his back on the girl and walked towards the exit of the hall. The girl asked him to tell her everything, but the man didn't even look back. The dark-haired girl had no choice but to run after the musician. The girl managed to catch up with An Hee-won. She asked the man why he was using Alex as a vessel to store a part of his friend. The man sighed. He realized that he would have to tell the dark-haired girl everything, otherwise she would not be far behind him. An Hee-won said that Alex's body was the perfect size for Gulbaha's tiny heart. The man began to explain to the girl that every magical creature has a vulnerable organ. In vampires, it is the heart. Gulbaha's heart was cut into 10 pieces. The dark-haired girl asked who had treated the vampire so cruelly, and Hee-won replied that it was the work of the goddess, whom Gulbaha worshipped. It was she who killed the blonde vampire. The reasons why the goddess did this to her devotee were unknown. Some said that she was in love with Gulbacha and killed the vampire because she could not be with him. Some claimed that the goddess thus punished Gulbacha for his greed and lust for power. But these are all just rumors that shouldn't be trusted. The man and the dark-haired woman entered the elevator. The girl wanted to ask An Hee-won something else about Gulbach, but the pianist stopped her. "That's all you can know. Anything else is too important." He pressed the up button. In any case, the musician intended to bring his friend back to life, so he collected Gulbaha's heart piece by piece. But An Hee-won was unable to find all the pieces of the vampire's heart. What An Hee-won managed to collect was smaller than the heart of a 2-year-old child. The pianist began looking for a body that could accommodate the tiny heart, and that body was Alex Richter. "Wait," a puzzle gradually formed in the dark-haired woman's head. "So you removed the boy's own heart from his body and transplanted the remains of Gulbaha's organ?" The man reluctantly replied that it was okay to say so. The dark-haired woman activated her blind justice mode again. She screamed at An Hee-won, trying to understand how he could deprive a small child of his heart. This wasn't even cruelty, it was savagery. The man laughed. The dark-haired girl asked sarcastically what had made him so happy, but she received no answer. An Hee-won got out of the elevator and the girl hurried after him. Suddenly, something flew past her head and fell to the floor. The musician looked closely and said that the strange object was a bullet. The musician began to examine the dark-haired woman's body for any injuries. The man moved away from the dark-haired woman, making sure that everything was fine with her. Suddenly, the couple pointed their guns at each other again. An Hee-won stopped smoking his cigarette, instead studying the attackers. These were vampires, apparently sent by the elder Richter. An Hee-won snapped his fingers, and the bullets the ghouls had already fired from their pistols changed direction and hit the attackers. The musician turned his head towards the dark-haired woman and said in a calm tone that now they could safely go to one of the rooms. The man's gaze seemed somehow strange to the dark-haired woman, somewhat empty and glassy. Although on the other hand, none of the magical creatures that Khan met were particularly emotional. Except perhaps Alex. But he was still quite a child. The dark-haired woman asked the man where the rest of the vampires were. He replied that the monsters were most likely from An Ji-won. The man approached the door and pressed the handle. A rather interesting picture appeared before the dark-haired woman and An Hee-won. In the middle of the dark room, the musician's sister sat at a table. She was smoking a cigarette as usual, and all would be well if it weren't for several men lying on the floor, begging for mercy. An Ji-won noticed her brother, and her expression changed from calm to angry. "You're late," she exclaimed. The artist was unhappy that she had to fight a bunch of vampires alone. But the man ignored her indignation. Instead, he asked his sister where Alex and the elder Richter were. The woman said that the little one was on the veranda and that everything was fine. He had only had a slight fright. But his uncle was feeling much worse. Or rather, he felt like it. An Ji-won killed him. She did it so that he would finally leave the An family and let them have some fun. "Let's go to a party." The artist was already tired of sitting in this room. She wanted to dance and drink expensive alcohol. But An Hee-won was in no hurry to leave the room. He said in a calm tone that An Ji-won was wrong. The woman arched an eyebrow. The artist did not understand what her brother meant. The musician explained to the woman that she had let the elder Richter in. The artist was even more surprised. How could she have let a vampire in if he was here, lying on the floor at her feet? The woman looked closely at the corpse's face and realized that An Hee-won was right. The dead vampire did indeed have similar features to Richter, but was younger than him. An Ji-won didn't pay attention to this when she killed him. The musician told his sister that she had been deceived like a naive little girl. An Ji-won silently listened to all the accusations, but it was clear that in a moment she would respond to Hee-won just as rudely. The atmosphere was becoming tense. The dark-haired man wanted to leave the room. An Hee-won seemed to read Kang's mind and told her she could leave if she wanted. After all, she didn't have to watch the family squabbles. The girl sighed in relief. It was almost the first time she'd been truly grateful to An Hee-won. Kang hurried out of the room. The man closed the door behind her, and Ji-won asked her brother angrily what he was up to. The man replied that a woman shouldn't be so mean. He had only pointed out her mistake, but next time the artist would pay more attention to the small details. The woman sighed. She loved her brother, but sometimes he was simply unbearable. He lectured her like a small child. An Ji-won decided to change the subject and asked the musician if he was going to look for the elder Richter. The man himself didn't know the answer to this question. He thought that the blonde vampire had shamefully fled because he wanted to avoid a fight. And this approach to things appealed to the musician. He himself didn't like to let his hands go for no reason. And besides, it's not a fact that the elder Richter has left the building. He could be anywhere, in a closet, behind a wall, or even on the veranda with Alex. The musician pointed his finger at the boy. He flinched. Despite the glass, the little boy could hear An Hee-won and An Ji-won's conversation perfectly. The boy was frightened by the pianist's words about the possible presence of the elder Richter in the room. Alex hurried to leave the veranda, but he shouldn't have done that. Giant claws pierced the wall and closed around the little one. "Alex!" the woman shouted. She was about to rush at the boy, but An Hee-won ordered her to stay put. She won't help the boy now. She'll only get hurt herself. The vampire's hiss was heard. Tears welled up in Alex's eyes. The boy asked An Hee-won to save him. The man ignored the little one's words. It sounds strange, but he had more important things to do right now. He had to understand what the elder Richter wanted. The pianist decided not to drag it out and directly ask the fair-haired man about it. Richter broke into a maniacal smile. He reveled in the power he had over his nephew and the members of An's family. The blonde said that it would be better to give An Hee-won the stone before anything happened to Alex's heart. The musician asked the elder Richter why he was waiting for him to come. The vampire's eyes flashed. What else was there for me to do? The stone around Alex's neck could have been a fake. The fair-haired man did not trust An Hee-won, a being who even hid his name. In fact, the dark-haired man's name was Lucius Effendel. That was how the vampire addressed the man. The elder Richter thought that in this way he could anger the musician, but the musician remained unmoved. He put out his cigarette and said that this time the blonde vampire was wrong. The stone on Alex's neck was real. The jewel, as if to confirm this, lit up in a bright red color. The elder Richter grabbed the stone with his claws, and Ji-won asked her brother what they would do. If they didn't give the stone back, Alex would die. An Hee-won noticed that the vampire would try to kill the little one anyway. While the musician and the artist were consulting, the elder Richter cut the chain around his nephew's neck with his claws and disappeared. The little one sank to the floor. He was bleeding. But An Hee-won didn't do anything. It seemed the wound wasn't too serious. An Ji-won ran to the exit of the room and abruptly opened the door. There was no one in the corridor. The woman cursed herself mentally. Damn vampire, he loved to cause them problems. Suddenly the artist froze in place. She remembered Khan. The girl who left the room shortly before the elder Richter attacked Alex has disappeared. An Hee-won approaches his sister and tells her not to worry. He manages to hide the bug in Kang's dress so they can control the situation. The man asked An Ji-won to cure Alex. He himself was going to check on Richter and Kang's whereabouts. The musician took his phone out of his pants pocket and opened the tracking app. The dark-haired man and the vampire were near An Ji-won and An Hee-won. The man clenched his hand into a fist and told his sister that he would go after the elder Richter. Not only vampires, but also other magical creatures encroached on the stone. An Hee-won wanted to gather all his enemies in one place to remind them who he was. The man waved his hand, dark smoke enveloping him. A moment later, a tall man with flowing long hair and purple eyes stood in front of An Ji-won. Despite the late hour, the streets of New York were bustling with life. People were driving their cars everywhere. Some were hurrying home to their relatives. Others were hoping to have a good time at a nightclub. The city's residents, preoccupied with their own affairs, did not notice what was happening almost under their noses. A black silhouette whizzed past one of the buildings. It landed on the roof of a skyscraper. This silhouette was the elder Richter. The man was holding Khan on his shoulder, who was crying softly in fear. Surprisingly, her whimpers did not annoy the fair-haired man. He did not even try to silence the dark-haired man. Perhaps the man was very good at abstracting himself from everything. Or the vampire was focused on something very important, so he didn't just not notice that Kang was crying. He didn't even see the bright bug on the girl's dress. The man threw Kang onto the hard surface of the roof. The dark-haired girl hit her back painfully, but said nothing. The vampire roughly grabbed the girl by the shoulders and lifted her up sharply. He growled at Kang to keep still and took the jewel out of his pocket. The blonde man stared at him for a few seconds. The man was glad that he had managed to get what he had been hunting for years. But before he could run away with the jewel, he had to make sure it wasn't a fake. For that, he needed a dark-haired woman. With her help, the man wanted to test whether the stone worked. You will ask why he kidnapped an ordinary mortal and not some magical creature. But the fact is that the real jewel only works on humans. The man leaned into the dark-haired woman's face and ordered her to tell him how to use the stone. Kang replied through tears that she knew nothing. But the fair-haired man didn't believe her. He was sure that An Hee-won had told the dark-haired man everything he could about the jewel. And little Alex had to tell the girl something. The dark-haired woman said that it was not true. The fair-haired man stared at her with a murderous gaze for several seconds, but Khan did not say another word. The man realized that it seemed that she was not lying. He moved away from her and gritted his teeth in rage. That's why, when everything seems to be going according to plan, something happens that shatters all expectations. The blonde pulled the girl by the hand. Get up. Khan didn't dare disobey, because she was well aware that her rebelliousness was useless now. You shouldn't play with someone who can kill you at any moment, right? The man took the dark-haired girl in his arms and jumped off the roof. The girl noticed something in the sky and screamed. The blonde girl reacted to the sound for some reason. He must have realized that Kang's words were not to be taken lightly. She simply did not know how to lie. The man looked up into the sky. A creature with wings was rapidly approaching him and Kang. It was a fairy. The vampire kicked his foot in the air and rushed forward. Khan dug her nails into his back to keep from falling. Although she was afraid of the blonde, the prospect of crashing to her death scared her more. The man, meanwhile, muttered something about fairies in displeasure. Their appearance meant that the magical creatures already knew about the theft of the stone. So now the fair-haired man would be hunted by demons, werewolves, and other clans. The number of creatures in the sky had noticeably increased. Khan realized that she had to do something. Otherwise, one of these powerful magical creatures would definitely kill her. To prevent this from happening, she first had to persuade the elder Richter to give her the stone. The girl told the man that she wanted to help him. Maybe she could figure out how the stone worked. The vampire gritted his teeth but still descended onto the roof of the house. The man took out a stone and placed it in Kang's palm. A glimmer of hope flashed in the girl's eyes. Well, the blonde man had listened to her. which meant there was still a chance to be saved. Kang, of course, hoped that An Hee-won would help her, but the musician still hadn't arrived. The girl was feverishly thinking about what to do with the stone when she felt a flowing warmth on her palms. The jewel began to melt. A strange but familiar feeling flowed through the dark-haired girl's veins. Ecstasy. Then Khan finally understood what was what. The jewel that had once belonged to a vampire contained an ecstasy that only human skin could release. The dark-haired woman noticed that the vampire's eyes were bloodshot. He wanted to eat Khan. The girl looked down. There on the ground was a pool. Khan put the stone in her mouth, swallowed the jewel, and walked to the edge of the roof. A moment later, the dark-haired girl jumped. Her chest felt unbearably hot. Khan covered her mouth with her hands. Although it hurt, the girl did not regret swallowing the stone. That way, the elder Richter would not be able to harm Alex. The dark-haired girl didn't understand only one thing: how she had the courage to jump from a height of several dozen meters. And it didn't matter that there was a swimming pool below. Falling into the water can be quite traumatic if you fall incorrectly. The girl mentally scolded herself for not grouping before jumping. Khan thought that she would most likely die, although that wasn't the worst option compared to what the elder Richter could do to the dark-haired girl. Suddenly, Kang felt someone's hands on her back. "You're a good guy for taking care of the stone," a soft voice said. "But don't jump anymore. Next time I won't be able to catch you." The girl's mouth dropped open. An Hee-won. He saved her. The dark-haired woman sighed in relief and buried her nose in the man's neck. The musician was momentarily confused. He hadn't expected the dark-haired woman to react this way to his appearance. "Does she really feel safe with me?" the man asked himself. The dark-haired woman looked at her savior. Only now did she notice how he had changed. Long hair, a strange costume, and most importantly, her eyes. They turned bright purple, but they didn't lose their magnetism. An Hee-won smiled. Our Miss Kang doesn't think about the consequences of her actions at all? A moment later, the man and the girl fell into the pool. The dark-haired girl blinked and held her breath. An Hee-won pulled Kang up. With the help of magic, the musician managed to push himself and Kang to the surface of the water. The same magic threw the pair onto land, where several vampires in dark robes and hoods stood. One of them addressed the man. "Lucius Effendel." Khan stared at the musician in surprise. She knew about An Hee-won's phenomenal abilities, but she couldn't have imagined that he had another persona, Lucius Effendel. The girl noticed that it quite suited the other An Hee-won. The man's eyes flashed and he said that he hadn't gotten used to his role in a long time. The musician snapped his fingers and the water in the pool rose up. An Hee-won was demonstrating his power to the creatures. But this did not frighten them at all. The vampires raised their hands up and, having uttered several spells, created white circles in the air, which merged into one. A flash, and a creature with a sword appeared above the ground. She ran to An Hee-won and Kang. The musician arched an eyebrow and with a wave of his hand broke the creature's sword. She hiccuped and began to melt. It seemed that all her strength was locked in the weapon. The musician asked Khan to step back so that the remaining particles from the monster would not get on her skin. For a mere mortal, such contact could be dangerous. An Hee-won snapped his fingers again. The drops of water from the pool turned into stones, which the dark-haired man aimed at the vampires and asked if they were willing to risk their own lives for the stone. This jewel doesn't belong to them anyway, so they can't use it. But the vampires didn't back down. An Hee-won lifted the stones up and deflected his power away from them. The small stones flew straight at the vampires. The monsters fell to the ground. Some of them died from wounds inflicted by the stones, some simply from fright. The musician jumped up and with the help of magic changed his appearance. The dark-haired woman finally saw the familiar An Hee-won. A man with short dark hair, golden eyes, and of course a cigarette clenched between his thin fingers. "Lucius!" One of the vampires dared to address the musician even after what he had done to her allies. The vampire said that the fight that An Hee-won was waging for the stone was futile. The musician wouldn't be able to use the stone either. An Hee-won said that a vampire wouldn't mind. But the hooded stranger paid no attention to these words. He wasn't one of the timid. The creature asked what An Hee-won was going to do after Gulbaha woke up. The man inhaled smoke and replied in a disdainful tone that he was not going to report to the assistant clan leader. The vampire hissed menacingly. An Hee-won only smiled at this. "Weren't you taught to be grateful, Eraser, and to back down when given the chance?" The cigarette in the man's fingers began to smolder. And Haiwan would like Erazur and his minions to get out of here. The head vampire nodded, realizing that the musician was serious. A moment later, the monsters disappeared, leaving only black smoke in their wake. An Hee-won looked at Kang and smiled encouragingly at her. Everything is more or less normal now. The only thing to worry about right now is the stone. Where is it? The girl lowered her head. The dark-haired woman decided to ask the man about the jewel, to gently lead him to what had happened. She wondered if the stone really needed a person to work. An Hee-won said in a calm tone that it was so. As soon as a person moves away from the stone, it becomes an ordinary mineral again. The girl looked away from the musician. She still hadn't thought of another question to ask An Hee-won. The man noticed the panic on the dark-haired girl's face and looked into her eyes. He asked the girl where the stone was. The dark-haired girl realized that there was no point in lying or avoiding the question. An Hee-won would find out anyway. The girl closed her eyes and said out loud that she had swallowed a stone. The musician froze in place. He hadn't expected this. The dark-haired woman began to make excuses. In a trembling voice, she explained to her husband that she had done that with the stone because she didn't know if anyone would come to her aid. It was the only way to keep Alex safe. The man was silent. The dark-haired woman looked down at the floor and quietly asked if An Hee-won could pull the stone out of her. The musician put his hand to his forehead and sighed. Although he was not human, he was still tired of the constant problems. The obsession of vampires and other magical creatures with the stone, the attempts to revive Gulbacha, all of this was gradually wearing An Hee-won down. And then there was Kang, who still didn't know how to handle magical creatures. The man looked at Kang and said that she really didn't think about the consequences. The dark-haired girl opened her eyes wide. A nervous smile appeared on her face. Something told the girl that An Hee-won had said about the consequences for a reason. It seemed that it was impossible to remove the stone from a person, born in darkness. Those who left their cold bodies in search of pleasure. They received new roles and with them immortality and deep sadness. Their progenitor is Lilith, the one whom Adam cast out. It was Lilith who gave birth to magical creatures and then scattered them throughout the world. The particles of the goddess's darkness created ecstasy in everyone's thoughts. A ward in the city hospital. Kang sat on her hospital bed, her fingers clenching her throat. It still burned a little, even though 10 hours had passed since Kang had swallowed the stone. An Hee-won, who had recently entered the ward, said that according to the examination, the dark-haired woman was healthy. The doctors found no abnormalities. Kang looked at her husband. She was surprised. Did the stone have no effect on her body? That couldn't be. An Hee-won confirmed the girl's doubts. He lit a cigarette. You've lost the opportunity to live like a normal person. The man explained to Khan that the stone made her blood smell stronger. That's why the girl should stay away from Alex, at least for the foreseeable future. The girl was saddened by the musician's words. During the month spent with An Hee-won's family, she had gotten used to little Richter. He always supported and encouraged Kang. And, to the boy's credit, he never abused her blood. He drank only as much as he needed. On the other hand, Khan didn't flatter herself with hopes that Alex would stay that way. Perhaps with age he would become like the other vampires the dark-haired woman had seen. Yes, character also affects a person's behavior, but who knows the nature of ghouls? Khan lowered her gaze. She didn't want to lose her beloved Alex. An Hee-won told the dark-haired man that she should prepare herself mentally. For separation from Alex? The girl asked. The man laughed hoarsely. That wasn't what he meant at all. Separation from Alex was a trifle compared to what awaited her. The dark-haired man could die, and that was at best. The dark-haired woman asked, what was the worst-case scenario? The musician didn't answer. Kang wasn't surprised by this. An Hee-won always gave her some information selectively. The girl took a sip of water. An Hee-won noted that the dark-haired girl was drinking a lot. She said that she felt hot in her body. But I usually manage to cool down with 1 or 2 glasses. Kang looked at the floor. It's strange. An Hee-won lifted the cigarette to his lips and told Kang that the source of the heat flowing through her veins was the stone. It was because of it that the dark-haired woman couldn't get drunk. Even a barrel of water wouldn't be enough for her. The girl asked why this stone gave a feeling of heat. An Hee-won calmly said that each of the 7 types of Lilith stones has its own characteristic feature and conventionally denotes a certain organ. The jewel that Khan swallowed was a heart. Unfortunately, it wouldn't give the dark-haired girl any extraordinary abilities. She would simply become more active. How useless! The man's tone was bored. The dark-haired woman asked what other stones there were and what they meant. Alex had told her about the goddess's jewels once, but only in general terms. Kang was sure that An Hee-won knew more. The man raised his index finger. Have you started to bombard me with questions yet, Miss Kang? That's your style. Despite this sarcastic remark, the musician had no intention of hiding information about the stones. After all, the Khan, which contains one of the jewels, deserves to know about it. The stones symbolize the 7 elements: water, fire, air, earth, light, shadow, and soul. The minerals contain real fragments of Lilith, the queen of darkness. However, because the goddess was too powerful, the stone was first destroyed. In any case, the stone that Khan swallowed was Lilith's heart. The girl bit her fingernail. Only after An Hee-won's words did Kang realize how stuck she was. Just think, the dark-haired girl swallowed a real heart. And not a simple one either. Carrying the organ of a dark goddess inside you is strange, and very dangerous. Khan took a sip of water. Yes, she needed to calm down a bit right now, even though it was difficult. An Hee-won's eyes flashed and he said that they needed to find a way to remove the stone from the dark-haired woman's body as soon as possible. The man tried not to show Kang his concern. There was no need to make the girl even more nervous. Kang poured herself a little water and asked the musician if there had been any incidents like hers before. That would have simplified the situation. The man replied that he had not seen anything like it in the last 100 years. Perhaps someone in ancient times had done something as foolish as Khan. But it would be difficult to find out. We need to dig up the archives and look for old documents. Maybe An Hee-won and Kang will be able to find research on this topic. And if not, then rumors will do. But first, you need to help Kang deal with the heat. This can be done with the help of water. The dark-haired man is lucky that An Hee-won is the master of this element. The girl thanked the musician. He smiled slyly and said that he didn't need those words. What does that mean? Kang tensed. Does An Hee-won really not like being thanked? But no, that wasn't the point. The man was still irritated that Kang had swallowed the stone he had protected for 100 years. If the mineral's balance was disturbed, An Hee-won's plans would be ruined. And this will lead to terrible consequences. Khan does not need to know all the details, but she will be obliged to take some of the responsibility. The musician directed a serious look at the girl. The dark-haired woman timidly asked what responsibility she was talking about. You will wake Gulbach. The musician waved his hand with a cigarette. Yes, the vampire would be inferior because of his small heart, but that's how it is. An Hee-won doesn't have time to assemble this vital organ for vampires completely. And the small heart can perform its functions. The musician was sure of it. Despair appeared in the dark-haired girl's eyes. She didn't really want to wake up the crazy priest who was hiding in the heart of her pet Alex. But the girl couldn't deny An Hee-won. First, because then he wouldn't be relieving her suffering from the stone. Khan would simply die of thirst. And second, it wouldn't cost the man anything to make Khan do what he wanted. And the methods that An Hee-won will use to achieve her goal may not please Kang. The man left the ward. Kang looked down and noticed the musician's CD on the floor, the autographed disc that An Hee-won gave to Kang at the exhibition. The girl picked it up. Perhaps at least a part of the man the dark-haired woman knew remained in this disc. Not the priest who used a child to revive his friend, but a talented pianist with a gentle gaze and a unique playing style. Khan inserted the disc into the player. Music poured from the device. It covered the dark hair with a wave. The girl put her hand to her heart. She felt better. The heat receded. Kang opened her eyes wide. Does An Hee-won's music have miraculous properties? But Kang's relief was instant. The girl felt thirsty again. It seemed that the melody was not enough to free the girl from her suffering. The dark-haired man needed to hear a pianist play live. A concert. He was the one who could satisfy Kang's need. The next morning, the girl was talking on the phone with An Ji-won. Kang asked her to tell the pianist that she would come to his concert. The woman did not object and said that An Hee-won probably wouldn't mind either. However, the musician's sister won't be able to go with Kang, so the girl will have to enjoy someone else's company. An Ji-won, however, refused to let her go. Kang promised the woman that she wouldn't leave the house alone and hung up. An Ji-won reminded the dark-haired woman of her blonde friend. They were both overprotective of the girl. True, for different reasons. The blonde did it because she loved her friend, and An Ji-won. Apparently, the woman, like other magical creatures, considered the dark-haired one a container with a valuable mineral. Kang lowered her head. These thoughts made the girl sad. But Khan couldn't suffer for long due to lack of time. The girl started getting ready for the theater. She wanted to please the pianist, although she didn't know why. He was still a soulless piece of wood. A few hours later, Kang, dressed in a white dress with a coat of the same color over it, stood in the middle of the concert hall. The girl looked for her place with her eyes. To Kang's surprise, she was assigned to sit in the front row. Tickets for seats near the stage were very expensive, so she never bought them. Such were the privileges of An Hee-won's service. The girl sat down in one of the soft red chairs. The concert was to start in 5 minutes. The dark-haired girl was looking forward to it. She really wanted to ease the effect of the stone. Kang took a bottle of water out of her bag and was about to take a sip when her phone vibrated. The girl glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. He addressed the dark-haired girl by name. For some reason, Kang thought that this mysterious stranger was An Hee-won. The dark-haired woman asked the number about it, and it confirmed her suspicions. The girl turned off her phone as the rules required. She decided to ask An Hee-won about everything after the concert. About a minute later, the man came on stage. He bowed to the audience and held his gaze on Kang for a moment. The girl's heart sank. How handsome he was. A white shirt with a cream tie, a black jacket, and pants of the same color. Kang immediately remembered the day she first saw An Hee-won. Despite what she had learned about this man, he had not lost his charm. The musician sat down at the piano, shrugged his shoulders to warm up a bit, and tapped his fingers on the keys. A few days ago, in the hospital ward of Khan, dark-haired asked her husband why he had to wake Gulbok. Yes, this vampire was a friend of the first, but he was a crazy monster. The man placed his hand on his chin. Gulbacha, although dangerous, was a very strong vampire. If the balance was disturbed, An Hee-won might need the priest's help. The girl asked what balance she was talking about. The man lit a cigarette and sighed. It's not so easy to explain the meaning of all the Lilith stones in the community of magical beings, but it must be done. When several seals are linked together, the musician began, and one of them is destroyed, the rest will suffer as well. The disappearance of the stones will lead to disaster. The dark-haired woman nodded her head. The man smiled and said that Kan didn't need to worry about that right now. She just had to fulfill her obligations. That was all. An Hee-won will handle the rest of the problems himself, and if the musician suddenly needs anything else from the dark-haired woman, he will come to her. Until then, Kang is better off staying at home. She would be safe there. The man left the room, and before closing the door, he gave Kang a sympathetic look. Your task may seem impossible to you, but you will succeed. Concert hall. Kang sat and listened as if enchanted to An Hee-won's incredible playing. Yes, live performance can never match recordings no matter how good they are. Suddenly the melody stopped. Intermission. The girl took her phone out of her bag and opened a chat with An Hee-won. The man asked Kang to go up to the 3rd floor of the neighboring building and go into the far corridor. The girl was supposed to meet her husband right now. Kang almost choked with indignation. The dark-haired woman knew An Hee-won's true nature, but his egocentrism still surprised her. But what can you do? He is like that, one of the most talented musicians in Korea and a priest of the first order. The girl went to another building, went up to the 3rd floor and opened the door to the corridor. Kang involuntarily flinched when she heard the soft melody of her own phone. An unknown number flashed on the screen. The girl picked up the phone, thinking it was An Hee-won, and so it turned out. The man asked the dark-haired woman in a somewhat irritated tone where she was. He was tired of waiting. Tired of waiting? Kang was surprised. He himself had arranged to meet her in the next building. The girl moved the phone away from her ear and reopened the chat with An Hee-won to quote the message he had sent her at the beginning of the intermission to her husband. Just in case, the girl looked at the number, and it didn't match the one An Hee-won had called her from. The girl trembled. It turns out someone had trapped her. The real An Hee-won asked her whereabouts for the 2nd time. Khan decided to tell him about the message from the stranger. Suddenly, the dark-haired girl heard some strange sounds from the depths of the corridor. And a moment later, she saw red dust. Kang froze in place. Fear paralyzed her body. An Hee-won was saying something into the phone, but the girl couldn't hear. The man realized that she was in trouble. In very big trouble. The musician called his secretary and asked him to cancel the concert. An Hee-won had to save Kang. The musician tried to reach the dark-haired girl again. He repeated her name several times, loud and slow, and it worked. Kang finally heard him. The girl asked what she should do. The musician told her to leave the building. There might be enemies lurking in the corridor. The dark-haired girl hurried to the exit from the corridor, but did not have time to approach the door. A bright blue glow cut Kang's hand and threw the girl against the wall. The dark-haired girl sat down on the floor. Blood was flowing from the wound, but the girl paid no attention to it. She looked around to see where she had been attacked from, but due to the total darkness, Kang could not see anything. The girl's heart began to beat faster. Yes, we need to get together. The girl tried to calm down. She got up and ran towards the exit. Escape was her only chance to save herself. A defenseless person would not be able to repel the attacks of monsters. The girl was thrown back against the wall. A blue glow chased her. Kang screamed. She didn't have the strength to run. The dark-haired girl's dress was stained with blood. The girl almost felt sick from it. Suddenly, Kang heard a crack from above. Someone was trying to break through the ceiling. A moment later, a hand with black claws, glowing with a gray-blue light, slammed into the floor. The dark-haired girl backed away, her gaze fixed on the monster's body part. The girl tried to move very slowly and quietly so as not to provoke the hand. Kang managed to reach the door without any injuries. The girl carefully opened it and saw another corridor. "What the hell?" Kang said mentally. "He wasn't here." The dark-haired girl thought that this was another trap. Meanwhile, a giant paw was closing in on the dark-haired girl. The girl decided to run down the second corridor. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, the space around her changed. Tables, office chairs, shelves. The corridor turned into something resembling an office. Kang squeezed her injured hand. No matter how much the girl tried to fool herself, there had to be a way out of this strange room. She saw another door and opened it. The red room. Kang went inside. A hand appeared in the middle of the room. Kang took a step back and cursed in her mind. This monster had the ability to appear silently, which made it difficult for Kang to get out. The hand reached for the dark-haired one. At the same time, the part of the body radiated some kind of force that stung Kang. The girl closed her eyes. Burning pain poured through her veins. The dark-haired girl was overcome with panic, like when Richter had kidnapped her from the party. The only difference was that night, An Hee-won had been able to track Kang's whereabouts. A hand rushed towards the girl. She pressed her whole body against the wall. A moment later, small fragments of some material dug into the dark-haired woman. Kang lost consciousness. Her body somehow broke through the wall. "Damn it, open your eyes!" The dark-haired girl came to her senses on the cold blue floor. The girl looked up and saw a tall, fair-haired woman in a black mini dress in front of her. It was An Ji-won. Like her brother, she had two roles, and the second suited her better. The woman with thick, wavy gray hair and pink eyes looked more like An Ji-won than the shy artist. Kang wanted to say something, but she didn't have time. A giant hand appeared above the women's heads. "Back!" shouted the fair-haired Kang. Pieces of the ceiling fell on the dark-haired woman and An Ji-won. Using her strength, the blonde pressed her hand to the floor. The woman bit her finger and told the dark-haired one that he was unlikely to be able to get them out of the maze. He was blocking some of her abilities. The only thing An Ji-won could do was buy some time by fighting the hand. Part of the monster's body had already regained consciousness and was approaching the blonde with the intention of avenging her for the insult. An Ji-won tensed her muscles, waved her hand and rose up, enveloping herself in a purple-pink glow. The woman hovered in the air to take aim. A moment later, the blonde jumped straight onto her hand. She began to thrash from side to side, trying to throw An Ji-won off her. But the woman kept her balance pretty well. An Ji-won threw Kang to run, but the dark-haired girl was in no hurry to obey the woman's order. The girl felt too weak to run. Her injured hand trembled. The dark-haired woman sat down on the floor. An Ji-won said nothing to Kang. The woman was busy wrestling with her hand. Suddenly, bats appeared in the room. Kang screamed. She was afraid of these animals, but it seemed they had no intention of harming the dark-haired man or An Ji-won in any way. The bats were merely guides for the vampire who had descended into the room. The boy, dressed in a red cloak, Alex Richter. The little one ran to Kang as soon as his shoes touched the floor. He offered his hand to the dark-haired boy and said that he missed her. The blonde boy's smile warmed the girl. She even forgot about An Hee-won's warning about Alex. The boy asked the dark-haired girl if she was really scared. "Little things," Kang smiled weakly. The little one's eyes twinkled and said that now she had nothing to worry about, because vampires knew their way around labyrinths. They navigated through traps like this like fish in water. The blonde grabbed the girl by the hand and pulled her towards the exit of the room. They had to hurry to avoid being hit by the hefty hand. The dark-haired girl noticed that Alex didn't pay attention to her blood. Could he really control himself so well at such a young age? The blonde turned to the girl and smiled. "I was worried when I came here. It's all because of the weak strength inside me." Kang realized that the reason for Alex's normal behavior was the weakening of the stone's effect on the blood. The girl asked the blonde if everything would be okay with An Ji-won. Maybe they should take the woman with them. Alex said there was no need to worry so much. The huge hand that targeted Kang was an Arcadia trick. And An Hee-won's sister is a professional at fighting these creatures. The boy and the girl left the room. Khan asked why the Arcadians had attacked her. Alex explained that they had a grudge against Gulbach. When the Arcadians realized that the stone would not be theirs, they decided to destroy it, all in order to prevent Gulbaha from reviving. The dark-haired woman asked what kind of resentment Arkady had against the vampire priest. Alex didn't know the details because this story was very old. But An Hee-won briefly told the boy about the relationship between the Arcadians and Gulbaha. The latter killed Abeltuid Erphagos, the head of the Arcadians. No one ever learned the reasons for such cruelty. Khan pursed her lips. The more she learned about the vampire head, the more she loathed him. His bloodlust knew no bounds. Wasn't killing his father enough for Gulbahar? Why did the priest go so far? Maybe he wanted more power. Maybe he was blinded by a sick, fanatical love for the goddess he worshipped. Who knows? If An Hee-won had known the reasons for Gulbaha's cruelty, he still wouldn't have told Kang about them. The dark-haired man was pulled out of his thoughts by a sharp pain in his injured arm. Alex pulled the girl's hand too hard. The little guy immediately apologized for it and told Kang that she would have to suffer. In addition to moving through the maze, Alex had to destroy it. It doesn't take very long, but it still slows down their release. The dark-haired woman hurried to reassure the boy. "It's okay, Alex, I feel fine." Only it wasn't true. Khan felt nauseous. It seemed that the stone had reacted to her conversation with little Richter about Gulbach. Meanwhile, Alex led the girl to one of the doors. The dark-haired woman and Alex almost got out, but to get to the other room, a small ritual had to be performed. The boy touched the doorknob and it somehow cut his palms. The little boy gritted his teeth in pain. The girl wanted to go up to Alex and ask if he needed help, but the boy wouldn't let her even come close to him. Mortals cannot interfere with rituals. Ancient magic can simply kill people. A blinding yellow glow appeared around Alex. With a wave of his hand, the boy drew a circle on the floor. Something started rattling at the door. Alex surrounded himself with yellow crystals. Suddenly, a purple glow emerged from behind the closed door. Khan shouted for Alex to be careful. Following the glow, a spike appeared and pierced Alex. The boy grimaced and croaked, so that the dark-haired girl would not worry about him and in no case come too close. Alex aimed the yellow glow from his hands at the spike. It moved back, but that wasn't the end of it. The magic threw Alex against the wall. It hurt for Khan to watch, but she didn't move. The girl understood. If the blonde says that intervention is unnecessary, then it is. Alex's eyes closed and blood spurted from his mouth in a fountain. The little boy's body had fallen to the floor. His chest and neck were covered in blood. Alex wasn't moving. He looked like a rag doll, a fragile and weak doll. Khan opened her eyes wide. A scream escaped her throat. The girl thought it was the end. Alex didn't move, and that worried Khan very much. Was he really dead? Blood was pouring onto the floor. The dark-haired girl ran to the boy and knelt down. The girl pressed Alex's body to her and felt the pulse on his neck with her fingers. "Alive," Khan breathed. Now everything depended only on the dark-haired girl. She had to take Alex in her arms and run away from there as fast as possible. The girl felt a duty to the fair-haired girl. She had to bring him to An Hee-won as soon as possible. But the dark-haired girl didn't know how to do it. Her injured, mush-like arm wouldn't withstand any strain. While Kang was thinking about how to save the little one, the door across from her opened. A man in a white shirt with horns on his head emerged. His bright red eyes burned with an evil fire. The man was talking to someone through something that looked like a walkie-talkie. Two huge black wings protruded from his back. The stranger approached Khan, glanced at Alex and smiled. He said into his walkie-talkie that there was no point in destroying the Lilith stone anymore. The girl's hands trembled. Is Alex really dead? She asked herself in her mind. Suddenly, Kang heard a voice coming from nowhere. You have to say my name. The dark-haired girl opened her eyes wide. She didn't understand who was talking to her or why. Was she really capable of doing anything in such a situation? But the voice didn't subside. He said there was no time to hesitate. If Khan didn't do it right now, the horned creature would kill her and Alex. The dark-haired woman took a deep breath and said loudly, Gulbacha! She wasn't sure it would work because Gulbacha wasn't the vampire's full name. Fortunately, Khan was wrong. A half-naked man with long blonde hair reaching his knees emerged from Alex's body. Khan closed her eyes. The girl was terrified that she had summoned a priest. She, a simple person who had nothing to do with magic. Until recently. Gulbaha took a step forward and spoke. A wilted flower that came to life after spilled blood, as red as ecstasy. The vampire waved his hands and streaks of blood appeared on the floor. The horned creatures, of which there were already several, were trapped by large translucent balls. Khan finally dared to open her eyes. Gulbaha looked at her and smiled. But not evilly, as he did to his enemies, but somehow calmly, even encouragingly. The corner of Khan's mouth involuntarily rose. The vampire king turned out to be not as scary as she had imagined. The priest turned to the horned creatures. The man's eyes flashed and he said that he, Gulbaha Aziz Shahar, would take their lives today. It was clear from his voice that he was not joking. A moment later, the priest rushed at the enemies and began to suck the blood from each of them. He did it so quickly that the creatures did not even have time to jump out. Khan covered her mouth with her hand. The girl was trembling again. The dark-haired girl could not bear to watch the scenes of violence, even if they were dealing with those who had tried to kill her. Khan quietly asked Gulba to stop. The vampire looked back at the dark-haired man and absorbed all the blood into himself. At the same time, his face became younger. It seemed that the priest used the blood not only as food, but also as a rejuvenating potion. The man headed towards Khan. You freed me, but you are still afraid. Centuries ago, a man dressed in a long red cloak with a hood wandered through the desert. The strange traveler was Gulbacha. He was trying to find something that would help him conquer Lilith. The vampire was obsessed with the supreme goddess, as well as with the power he could gain by becoming the husband, or at least the partner of the red-haired Lilith. Gulbaha spent more than one day in the desert searching for what he needed, but it didn't lead to anything. The blonde fell to his knees. Why? Why do I want to get the forbidden thing so much? Suddenly, the priest heard someone's deep, calm voice. I can ease your suffering. Come with me to receive everything available to us in this world. The blonde looked up and saw a man with black, slightly matted hair and purple eyes in front of him. He was smiling at the vampire. Gulbacha agreed to the stranger's offer. He betrayed his love for Lilith and his unattainable dream of becoming a god. Why would he do that if there was someone who could give him something more real, but no less attractive? The theater corridor. The dark-haired man told Gulba not to worry. At the same time, he called the girl Nuna. She shuddered at this address. Only Alex used that name for her. Is his soul now in the body of a vampire priest? Gulbacha smiled. He joked to relax the girl a little, but his words had the opposite effect. Khan was furious. How dare this monster talk to her like Alex, who had suffered because of him? The girl asked loudly what was wrong with Alex. The blonde waved his hand and replied in a bored tone that little Richter would wake up as soon as he, Gulbacha, fell asleep. Lilith's heart woke the vampires' heads for a short while. It was too weak to ensure Gulbaha's constant vital activity. And even then, without the catalyst that the dark-haired woman's blood had become, Lilith's heart would hardly have been able to summon the priest. Suddenly, Gulbacha burst out laughing. The vampire was amused that Lucius had made such a small, thin, and timid girl like Khan his food. After a few minutes, the fair-haired man calmed down. He asked the girl where his friend was. The dark-haired girl realized that she was talking about An Hee-wan. Kang replied that the man was outside the maze that Alex was trying to get her out of. Of course, the vampire replied. He snapped his fingers and the room filled with red smoke. The dark-haired man ordered Gulbach, somewhat haughtily, to follow the smoke. He would bring the girl to An Hee-won. Kang was supposed to convey the vampire priest's words to An Hee-won. The dark-haired woman asked what words exactly should be used to convey their entire conversation. The vampire arched an eyebrow. Of course not. Their conversation was empty chatter that would have no meaning to An Hee-won. The musician only needed to know that Gulbaha could not stay in her body for long. Also, An Hee-won must prepare for the awakening of Lilith. The seal on her heart is breaking. Very soon the goddess will be free and take revenge on those who imprisoned her in 7 minerals 100 years ago. And Hee-won must hurry to carry out the plan he and Gulbaha had made when they first met. The black-haired one must become the ruler of the world, and the vampire its lord. After these words, Gulbaha disappeared. Alex lay on the floor with his arms folded on his stomach. There was no trace of the wound on the boy's chest. It seemed that Gulbaha had healed him with the help of his magic. Or maybe Lilith's heart had restored the little one. Can didn't know about it and didn't really want to. Right now, she was only worried about the boy's condition. The girl leaned over to the blonde and quietly called out to him. The little one didn't respond, but his breathing indicated that everything was fine. The dark-haired woman, with some effort, threw Alex onto her good shoulder and slowly followed the red smoke. 15 minutes later, Can finally reached the exit. The girl sighed. It was not easy to drag Alex several dozen meters, and the injured hand was making itself felt. Miss Kang! The dark-haired woman turned her head to the familiar voice. An Hee-won was standing near the theater. His expression was tense. It occurred to the dark-haired woman that the musician was worried about her. But the dark-haired girl quickly dismissed this assumption. Worried about me? What nonsense. Of course Alex was the one who worried him, or rather, Gulbacha. Khan smiled sadly and said that everything was fine. An Hee-won didn't believe her words. He noted that the dark-haired girl's hand looked terrible. If she didn't take care of it now, she might lose the limb. Khan didn't answer, but simply handed Alex over to her husband. To the dark-haired woman's surprise, the man didn't even look at the little one. He even held him roughly by the collar of his shirt. Like a kitten they want to drown. An Hee-won handed the blonde over to his guards and told Kang that he had been waiting for them with Alex at the front door because he didn't know how to destroy the maze. After all, he wasn't a vampire. The girl replied that she understood everything. Kang lowered her gaze. She had to tell her husband about Gulbaha, but she didn't know how to do it. An Hee-won seemed to have guessed that something was being hidden from him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have looked at Kang so expectantly. But the dark-haired girl was silent. The man, realizing that he would have to act, grabbed the girl by the waist and turned her towards him. The musician looked into the dark-haired woman's eyes and asked if she had met Gulbaha. If so, what did he tell you, Miss Khan? The man asked. Tell me,